Once I've decided on the theme and composition, I draw a rough sketch of what I'd like the piece to look like. Then I lower the opacity of my sketch layer so that I can still faintly see it while I line. I'm using a free brush from Clip Studio called Pencil R to draw my line art. I like to use thinner lines on color illustrations so that they don't get in the way of the colors, but that's just my personal preference. This piece, however, will be monochrome, so I'll be lining with a thicker brush. I generally draw hair with thicker lines for the main shape and thinner ones for the inside details. Putting too much detail into each tuft can backfire and make it look flat, so at first I only add them where I want to. In the same vein, I'll look at the whole picture as I draw the eyes and body, then be deliberate with my lines to keep the balance. I think that not every part of an illustration needs to be lined, but that may depend on your personal style. At first, I thought about just simply drawing a girl, smiling and holding a bouquet of flowers. Then I realized that the bouquet would take a lot of time to draw, and it'd be a bit boring if there wasn't any meaning to it. Thus, I decided the flowers themselves should represent her feelings. The meanings of each flower conceal a different part of the schoolgirl's adolescent uncertainty. Now I'll draw the lilies. I'm looking at reference photos I found on the internet as I go. At this point, I'm mostly focusing on the placement and shape of the flowers, again, trying to avoid too much detail. If you completely draw each small piece one at a time, it can throw off the balance of the whole piece, making your drawing look stiff and unnatural. That's why I try to roughly sketch out each part and then gradually flesh out the illustration. White lilies mean genuinity and purity, whereas pink and red lilies mean vanity. It's interesting that different colors of the same flower can have different meanings, kind of like how humans are dual-natured. It's really fascinating. I start with the outside of the bouquet and work my way in because I think that makes it easier to understand how much space to give each part. That and because the drawing is in black and white, the inside part doesn't stand out much in the beginning. Next are the sandersanya and carnations. I did a quick search on the internet and found that sandersanya are cute yellow flowers that bloom in summer. They can mean praying for you or represent charm. I drew them pretty small, but in reality, they're fairly big flowers. They're cute and round, much easier to draw than the lilies. Carnations are like lilies, where each color has a different meaning. These are supposed to be yellow carnations, which represent disdain. Once I started drawing them, though, I realized they look a lot like roses, especially in black and white. Moving on to the roses, compared to the carnations, their petals taper to more of a point at the ends. It's hard but important to draw them distinctively so that viewers can know what they are. Yellow roses can mean either jealousy or friendship. It's incredible that a bright flower can have a dark side. The language of flowers is remarkable. White rosebuds can stand for girlhood or the idea of being too young to fall in love. I'm still doing a rough draft, so my lines are on the thicker side. Like I mentioned with the lilies, I'm just deciding how to place and shape the flowers. Now that I've arranged the flowers, I'll start coloring. I'm using the lasso tool from the selection section to select areas and paint them all at once. Adding the black really changes the tone of the piece. The black pulls together the image, but I'm also using it to give the feeling that the flowers aren't all fully formed. Next, I'll use the gauze cloud brush from the subtool section to break up the solid areas. I prefer this one to the normal airbrush tool because it breaks up the color more lightly. Now I'll move on to the sleeve and ribbon that hold the flowers together. I'll use the lasso tool to paint and shape it all at once, then use pencil R to give more structure and depth. Once I'm done, I'll use the cloud gauze brush again to lightly add highlights. Now I'm going to untie the red ribbon holding the flowers together. This symbolizes her not being able to hold back her emotions any longer, showing that she's ready to let them burst. Time to draw the girl's uniform. It's a black uniform, so I'll leave areas where the light hits white and only paint where I want the color to show through. I'll also balance out the dense flowers by using lines sparingly for her silhouette and the details in her clothes. I'm taking the shading layer I drafted, moving it up, and adjusting the shadows to better fit the lines. When I try to shade after I've already lined, I tend to strictly follow the lines and end up making the shadows too thin. Adjusting the big generic shadows I drafted helps me make the illustration less dull. Back to lining the girl. Whenever I draw details for a specific area, I make an effort to continually check the balance of the whole drawing. The girl herself doesn't have much of an expression because I don't want the viewer to know what she's thinking. The bouquet is supposed to reveal her emotions. I'm trying to convey that even if she looks composed on the outside, her inner emotions are spiraling, so tumultuous they could explode. I keep redrawing her eyes until I get them right, again looking at the whole image as I go. Eyes may only take up a small portion of the picture, but they have a huge influence on the mood of the piece, which is why it's so important to get them right. I'm adding a few more details to the bouquet. Some extra lines, more tone to express color differences, inner petals and leaves, and the paper wrapping around the flowers. When adding details, I take extra care to not add too much and consult with the rest of the piece as I go. I'll also add some lace to the bouquet. I'm going for a translucent lace film wrapping the flowers. I'm using another free Clip Studio brush for this. There's tons of useful free brushes. It's fun to look around and try them out. This one in particular adds a light, gentle touch and softens the mood. Now to clean up the lines on the flowers. I already decided on the thickness of the lines around the girl, so I'll be sure to maintain the balance while I move on. Adding too many lines to the bouquet will make the image too busy and strain the viewer's eyes, so I'll choose their placement carefully and thin them out when needed. To blur the lines, I use the Blend tool from the Subtool section. It nicely lightens and blends the colors, making it a very useful tool. Lightening some of the more concentrated, thicker lines helps bring out more depth. I made the lines on the outside part of the bouquet darker than the faint, thin ones closer to the girl. The nape of her neck stands out because it's so bright, so I wanted to make the flowers closer to her look paler too. I'll also fix up the wrapping paper that's holding the flowers. In order to make the frills look more realistic, I'll take some time to figure out the right thickness for each line. I'm drawing out a black hemp string underneath the red ribbon to make it pop. I'll also faintly draw her inner arm. At this point, I study the balance of the drawing and tighten up the lines. I thin and fade out any lines that aren't essential and thicken up the more important ones. I'll also add a few leaves. And I'll draw a few falling petals too. Using the lasso tool to loosely select an area, I add some shading and use the Gaussian blur from the filter section to blur them out. Now I'll add a little pattern to the background. I grab the general area with the lasso tool, though it went a little too far, and use the same lace brush I used for the bouquet. You can take a better look for yourself in the PSD file. For the final touches, I add a few extra lines, remove any parts I don't need, and cut down or fade out any obstructive lines. Now I'll stop and make a copy, merge the layers, and blur parts of the picture to create depth. For now, I'm done with my iPad. I'll move to Photoshop on my PC to do further editing. I stopped to check the image on my PC in order to take a look at the illustration in a new environment. If I finish up on my iPad and then take a look on my PC, I sometimes find that the colors are different than I imagined, or that certain areas don't look quite right. I make a point to check my art in different environments to prevent that from happening. While I'm in Photoshop, I'll try out different filters and see if there's anything that strikes my fancy or fits the piece. It's back to my iPad after I finish in Photoshop. I didn't do too much to this picture, just up the saturation and use the burn tool to create more contrast. It's finished.